The word Neanderthal usually brings a specific image to mind: a hunched figure, a heavy brow, a club in one hand. This is the classic caveman, a brute, simple, maybe even stupid. We see this image in cartoons and movies. It's a caricature, but it's a powerful one. And for a long time, it's what science thought too. They were seen as a failed experiment, a dead end on the evolutionary tree. Our ancestors, the smart ones, showed up and the dim-witted Neanderthals just faded away. But that story is wrong. It's a simple story, and science is rarely simple. The more we learn, the more complex and human the Neanderthals become. The evidence we have today paints a very different picture. It suggests they were not grunting animals. They were thinking, feeling beings. They were people, and this raises a big question. If they were people, were they emotionally intelligent? Emotional intelligence is a modern term. It's about understanding your own emotions and the emotions of others. It's about using that understanding to guide your thoughts and actions. It involves things like empathy, self-awareness, compassion, and social skill. These are not things that fossilize. We can't dig up a feeling. We can't find a fossilized social bond. Okay, so how can we possibly know? We have to look at the clues they left behind. We have to be detectives. The evidence is indirect. It's in their bones, their tools, their homes, and their graves. Each piece of evidence is like a single word in a lost language. By itself, it doesn't mean much. But when you put the words together, you start to form sentences. You start to see a story. And the story of the Neanderthals is one of surprising emotional depth. Let's start with the most basic thing, the brain. The Neanderthal brain was big. In fact, on average, it was slightly larger than our own modern human brain. The sizes and everything, of course. A bigger engine doesn't always mean a faster car. The organization of the brain matters more. We can't see a Neanderthal brain, but we can see the inside of their skulls. Scientists can make a cast of the inside of a skull, called an endocast. This gives us a rough map of the brain's surface. Their endocasts show that their brains were shaped differently from ours. Ours are more rounded, like a soccer ball. Theirs were longer, more like a football. Some areas were bigger, some were smaller. Their occipital lobes in the back of the brain seem to have been larger. This area is linked to vision. Perhaps they had excellent eyesight, adapted to the low light of a European winter. Their parietal lobes, however, seem to have been a bit smaller than ours. These areas are involved in things like sensory integration and visualization. What about the parts of the brain linked to emotion and social life? The frontal lobes are key. They handle planning, problem solving, and regulating social behavior. Neanderthal frontal lobes were large and complex, very similar to ours. The temporal lobes, which are involved in memory, emotion, and understanding language, were also well developed. The basic hardware for a complex emotional life was there. Their brains were not simple or primitive. They were human brains, just a different model. The wiring might have been a little different, leading to a different way of thinking and feeling, but it was capable of complexity. But brains are just potential. Like, what matters is what they did with them. And this is where the evidence gets really compelling. We find it in the bones of individuals who should have died, but didn't. One of the most famous Neanderthal skeletons is from a place called Shanidar Cave in Iraq. He's known as Shanidar I. He was an old man for his time, maybe around 40 or 50. And his life was hard. His bones tell a story of incredible pain and disability. He had a crushing blow to the left side of his head when he was young. It fractured his skull and likely blinded him in his left eye. The injury would have damaged his brain, possibly paralyzing the right side of his body. His right arm was withered and useless. It was fractured in several places and had healed poorly. In fact, the lower part of his arm was missing. It might have been amputated, or it might have just fallen off after the injury. He also had a bad leg and would have walked with a painful limp. And to top it all off, he was probably deaf. The bone growth in his ear canals would have severely impaired his hearing. Think about this man's life. He was half blind, half paralyzed, deaf, and in constant pain. In the harsh world of the Ice Age, survival was a daily struggle even for the strong. A lone hunter with these injuries would be dead in a week. He couldn't hunt effectively. He couldn't defend himself from predators. He couldn't even hear a warning cry from his companions. And yet, he lived. He lived for years, maybe decades, after his injuries. How was that possible? There is only one explanation. Someone took care of him. His group, his family, did not leave him behind. They protected him, they shared their food with him, they guided him when they moved camp. They tolerated his slowness and his limitations. This is not the behavior of simple brutes. This is compassion, this is empathy. It's the ability to see another suffering and feel a responsibility to help. It's a sign of a deep social bond. Shanidar 1 was not just a mouth to feed. He was a member of the group. He had value beyond his ability to hunt. Maybe he was a good storyteller. Maybe he was a wise elder who remembered where to find water in a dry season. We don't know, but we know he was cared for, and that care is a powerful sign of emotional intelligence. And he's not the only one. There's the old man of La Chapelle-aux-Saints found in France. He was also old and suffered from crippling arthritis. His spine was bent, and he had lost most of his teeth. He wouldn't have been able to chew tough meat, the main part of the Neanderthal diet. Someone must have prepared his food for him, maybe chewing it first to make it soft. Again, we see evidence of care, of a community that supports its most vulnerable members. This wasn't a one-off event. It seems to have been a part of Neanderthal culture. This care for the living extends to how they treated their dead. Animals in the wild die and are left where they fall. They are eaten by scavengers or simply decay. Early human ancestors did the same. But at some point that changed, and Neanderthals were among the first to change it. They buried their dead. Finding a complete Neanderthal skeleton is rare. The fact that we have so many is because they were often intentionally buried in pits in the floors of caves. This protected the bodies from being scattered by animals. Some burials are simple. The body is just placed in a hole, but others are more elaborate. At a site called La Ferricie in France, several Neanderthals were buried, including adults and children. One child was laid in a pit, and a large stone slab was placed over it, perhaps to mark the grave or protect it. A deliberate burial means something. It means death is not just the end of a life. It's an event. It means the person who died still matters. It suggests grief. It suggests a sense of loss. You don't go to the trouble of digging a grave for something you don't care about. No, it's a way of saying goodbye. It's a way of respecting the person they were. This is a very human, very emotional act. The most famous and most controversial Neanderthal burial is also from Shanidar Cave. It's a different individual, Shanidar 4. When archaeologists excavated his grave in the 1960s, they took soil samples from around the skeleton. When they analyzed these samples, they found something amazing. They found large clumps of pollen. And it wasn't just random pollen blown in by the wind. The pollen came from several different species of brightly colored wildflowers. It looked like someone had gathered bunches of flowers and laid them on the grave. This flower burial became a powerful image. It suggested Neanderthals had funerals. It suggested they had rituals. They weren't just sad, they were creating a symbolic act to express that sadness. It was a beautiful, poetic idea. For many, it was the final nail in the coffin of the brutish caveman stereotype. Now, science is a skeptical business. In recent years, the flower burial has been questioned. Some researchers have argued that the pollen could have been brought into the cave by burrowing rodents. These animals sometimes store flower heads in their burrows. It's possible a rodent burrowed into the grave long after the burial and left the pollen behind. The debate is still ongoing. We may never know for sure if Shanidar 4 was buried with flowers. But even if the flower burial story isn't true, the evidence for intentional burial is still strong. And some burials have other interesting features. Skeletons are often found in a flexed or fetal position. Why? Was it to make the grave smaller, or did it have a symbolic meaning, like returning to the womb of the earth? We don't know, but the act of positioning a body suggests thought and intention. It suggests a world beyond the purely practical. This brings us to the world of art and symbolism. For a long time, it was thought that only modern humans, Homo sapiens, made art. Art is the ultimate sign of a modern mind. It shows abstract thought. It's about creating something that isn't a tool or a shelter. It has no practical purpose. It's about communication, expression, and beauty. It's about having an internal world and wanting to share it. The evidence for Neanderthal art is rarer and more subtle than the incredible cave paintings made by our ancestors. But it's there. And the more we look, the more we find. For example, Neanderthals used pigments. At many sites, we find lumps of ochre, a natural mineral that can be ground into a red or yellow powder. They used it. We find it on their tools. We also find shells with holes drilled in them, sometimes with traces of pigment. These are probably beads worn as a necklace or sewn onto clothing. Think about what that means. A necklace doesn't keep you warm. It doesn't help you kill a mammoth. It's decoration. It's about identity. It's a way of saying, this is me, or I belong to this group. Thus, it's a form of self-awareness and social signaling. It's a basic form of art. It shows a concern with appearance and a concept of self. At a site in Croatia called Krapina, researchers found a set of eagle talons. They had cut marks and signs of polishing on them. The conclusion was that they were worn as a pendant or some other kind of jewelry. An eagle is a powerful, impressive bird. Wearing its talons is a symbolic act. It might be about power, or skill in hunting, or a connection to the spiritual world. We don't know the exact meaning, but it is clearly symbolic. Even more exciting is new evidence that suggests Neanderthals might have made cave paintings. In Spain, there are several caves with simple paintings on the walls, red lines, dots, and hand stencils. For years, everyone assumed these were made by early modern humans, but recently, scientists were able to date the thin layer of calcite that had formed over the paint. And the dates came back as over 65,000 years old. That is more than 20,000 years before modern humans are thought to have arrived in Spain. The only people there at the time were Neanderthals. This is a game changer. If Neanderthals were painting on cave walls, they were engaging in the same kind of symbolic behavior that we long thought was uniquely our own. They were marking their world, they were creating symbols. It pushes their emotional and cognitive world much closer to ours. All of this caring for the sick, burying the dead, creating personal ornaments, and art happened within a social context. Neanderthals did not live alone. They lived in small, family-based groups. Their whole survival depended on cooperation. Look at their hunting. They were not scavengers picking at leftovers. They were top predators. They hunted huge animals like mammoths, woolly rhinos, and giant bison. You can't kill a mammoth with a spear by yourself. It takes a team. It takes planning, communication, and coordination. You need a leader to decide on a strategy. You need hunters to drive the animal towards a trap. You need others to move in for the kill. Everyone has to know their role and trust that others will do theirs. This level of cooperation requires a high degree of social intelligence. As people to read the intentions of others, you have to manage group dynamics, resolving conflicts, and reinforcing bonds. You have to be able to communicate complex ideas. Like, you three go left around that rock, and when I give the signal, we all move in. Could they communicate? Could they speak? The old idea was that they just grunted. But the physical evidence suggests otherwise. We have found a Neanderthal hyoid bone. This is a small bone in the neck that supports the tongue and larynx. It's crucial for speech. And the Neanderthal hyoid bone is basically identical to our own. This means, anatomically, there was nothing stopping them from making the same range of sounds that we can. Genetics gives us another clue. Scientists have mapped the Neanderthal genome. We know that they had the same version of a gene called FOXP2 that we do. This gene is strongly linked to the ability to learn and produce complex language. The genetic and anatomical pieces are in place. While we can never hear them talk, it's very likely they had a spoken language. And language is the ultimate tool for emotional intelligence. It allows you to name your feelings. It allows you to talk about the past and plan for the future. It lets you comfort a grieving friend, resolve an argument, or tell a story around the fire. A group of hunters that can talk and plan is far more effective than one that can only use gestures. A community that can share its feelings and histories is far more resilient. A language is the glue that holds a complex society together. So let's put all the pieces together. We have a species with a large, complex brain. We have evidence that they felt empathy and compassion, caring for the severely injured and the elderly for years. We see them treating their dead with respect, suggesting they felt grief and had a sense of the symbolic. We find them creating personal ornaments and art, showing self-awareness and the desire for expression. We see them living in cooperative groups that would have required sophisticated social skills and communication. Does this add up to emotional intelligence? It looks a lot like it. They seem to have been aware of their own inner states and the states of others. They use this awareness to build strong social bonds, to care for each other, and to function as a cohesive group. They weren't the unfeeling brutes of the old stereotype. They had a rich emotional world. It might not have been exactly like ours. Their differently shaped brains might have meant they experienced the world in a way we can't quite imagine. Perhaps their emotions were more intense or more subtle. Maybe their social bonds were structured in a different way. We can't know the flavor of their inner lives, but to say they didn't have one is to ignore a mountain of evidence. So if they were so smart, so capable, and so emotionally complex, why aren't they here anymore? Why did we survive and they disappeared? This is the final sad piece of the puzzle. It's tempting to fall back on the old story we were smarter and we outcompeted them. But the reality is probably more complicated and less triumphant. First, there were never that many of them. Genetic studies suggest their total population was always small, perhaps only tens of thousands spread across a huge area from Europe to Asia. Small populations are vulnerable. A single bad winter, a new disease, or a disruption in the food supply can have a devastating impact. Second, the climate was incredibly unstable. The Ice Age was not one long winter. It was a roller coaster of rapid warming and cooling. As the climate changed, forests would turn to grasslands, and grasslands would turn to ice. The animals they depended on would move or die out. Neanderthals were survivors. They weathered these changes for hundreds of thousands of years, but it was a constant stress. And then we showed up. Homo sapiens expanded out of Africa and arrived in Europe around 45,000 years ago. We were not necessarily smarter on an individual level, but we may have had some advantages. Our social networks seem to have been larger and more widespread. This meant we could share innovations and support each other over long distances. Our population was growing, while theirs was small and fragmented. It probably wasn't a war. There's little evidence of widespread violence between the two groups. It was more likely a slow process of competition. A slightly higher birth rate for us, a slightly lower one for them, a better ability to adapt to a specific climate shift. Over thousands of years, these small advantages add up. We were just a bit more successful, and in the harsh world of the Ice Age, a little bit of an edge is all it takes. And there's another part of the story we know from genetic evidence that we interbred. Many modern humans, especially those of European and Asian descent, carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA in their genomes. They didn't just vanish, they were, in a way, absorbed into our population. Part of them lives on in us. The story of the Neanderthals is not a story of failure. It's a story of a different kind of humanity. They were a successful species that survived for hundreds of thousands of years in some of the most challenging environments on Earth. They did it not with brute force, but with intelligence, cooperation, and care. They had the capacity for empathy, for grief, for symbolic thought, for art. They built strong communities that looked after the weak and the old. These are the very things we value most in our own humanity. They show a deep emotional intelligence. To see Neanderthals as anything less is to misunderstand the evidence. But it's also to misunderstand ourselves. Their story reminds us that there is more than one way to be human, and that our own emotional lives have roots that go deeper than we ever imagined, back to a time when we were not the only people on this planet. They were our cousins, not our caricatures, and they deserve that respect.